In the most exclusive district of London, where Georgian townhouses hide behind wrought iron gates and the rumble of supercars is the soundtrack of daily life, something unexpected happened. The 300,000 Bentley Continental GT, belonging to Lord William Ashford, industrial magnate of Mayfair, died with a metallic wheeze right in his private mews. The mechanics from the official Bentley dealership shook their heads gravely. Impossible to repair the car on site. It needed towing. That's when Emma Thompson stepped forward, 27 years old, in jeans torn from real work and hands that knew every secret of an engine. The mechanic's laughter rang out, cruel and mocking. A woman claiming she could fix a Bentley? The absurdity of the century. But Emma ignored every sneer, bent over the engine, and within 5 minutes the W12 roared back to life, powerful and perfect. When she straightened up, face smudged with grease, but eyes blazing with victory, the silence was deafening. Lord William Ashford, who had watched the entire scene from his study window, understood he had just witnessed the beginning of a revolution. Belgravia gleamed in the May sunshine like a crown jewel of London privilege. The white stucco terraces stood in perfect symmetry, their black railings and window boxes telling stories of old money and quiet power. Into this realm of privilege, Emma Thompson's battered Ford Transit van rumbled like a wrong note in a symphony. The white van bore the scars of a working life, scratches and dents that told of freezing mornings in Hackney, emergency calls to Brixton or Tower Hamlets. On the side, the fading lettering, Thompson's Mobile Mechanics, remained readable, a testament to pride that no hardship had managed to break. Emma cut the engine, which protested with 2 coughs, its habitual signature. At 27, she already had the weathered face of someone who'd had to grow up too fast. Daughter of a construction worker who died in a scaffolding accident when she was 15, she had found refuge in her grandfather Arthur's garage in Bethnal Green, where the smell of burnt oil mixed with that of stubborn dreams. Grandad Arthur had been her teacher, her hero, her shield against a world that said no before she even opened her mouth. In the small garage in the East End, between dismantled engines and yellowed calendars, he had taught her that machines have souls, and these souls don't distinguish between genders. But Grandad had died the year she finished college, leaving her alone to fight windmills that looked like giants. The call that morning had come from Lord Ashford's butler, an impeccable voice that betrayed a certain urgency. His lordship's Bentley wouldn't start. All the official mechanics were booked. £500 for an emergency call-out was too much to refuse, even if it meant entering a world where she wasn't welcome. The mews behind Ashford House looked like a film set. The midnight blue Bentley Continental GT sat motionless at the center, surrounded by an audience worth more than a small nation's GDP. 3 mechanics from the official dealership gestured around the open bonnet, their pristine overalls screaming incompetence disguised as professionalism. 2 neighbors in Savile Row suits observed with the detached interest of spectators at a free show. A lady with a perfectly groomed Pomeranian was taking photos with the latest iPhone. And then there was him, Lord William Ashford. Emma recognized him immediately. No need for photos from the Financial Times or the Telegraph. Power emanated from him like heat from a radiator. 42 years carried with the natural elegance of one born to command, he observed the scene leaning against his townhouse balustrade with the jaded air of someone who had seen too much to be surprised anymore. The head mechanic from the dealership was lecturing on the complexity of Bentley electronic systems. He was a man in his 50s with a prominent belly, one of those who spent more time at business lunches than under bonnets. His hands were too clean for someone who claimed to get dirty with engines every day. It was when Emma approached with her toolbox that time seemed to stop. Her grandfather's old snap-on box, dented and scratched, weighed familiarly in her hand. Silence fell over the group like a blanket. Then the laughter exploded. They weren't cruel laughs, which was almost worse. They were condescending laughs, like watching a child pretending to drive daddy's car. The youngest mechanic pulled out his phone to film. The lady with the Pomeranian raised a bejeweled hand to her mouth to hide a smile. The two neighbors exchanged knowing nudges. The head mechanic was the first to speak, his voice dripping with false concern. A woman mechanic? And she wanted to touch a Bentley? His tone suggested he'd seen everything in life, but this was beyond comprehension. Emma felt her blood boil, but she'd learned that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. She looked at Lord Ashford, searching his gray eyes for a spark of humanity. She found only distant curiosity, as if he were observing a scientific experiment. When he consented to let her try, more from boredom than confidence, calling it entertainment, Emma understood she was alone. As always, she approached the Bentley, ignoring the increasingly vulgar comments. The young mechanic had started a live stream, commenting on her every movement like a football match. But when Emma opened the bonnet and saw the engine, everything else vanished. The W12 Biturbo was a work of art in metal and precision. Emma closed her eyes and did what her grandfather had taught her. She listened, not with her ears, but with something deeper. Her hands moved over the engine, feeling vibrations others couldn't perceive, temperatures that told stories, small anomalies that computers couldn't read. The problem revealed itself in a mechanical whisper only she could hear. It wasn't electronic, as the three experts claimed. It was mechanical, sneaky, hidden. The throttle linkage was misaligned by a few millimeters, enough to confuse the sensors and shut down the entire system. She worked in silence for 5 minutes that felt like hours. The audience had stopped laughing. Phones had lowered. Even the Pomeranian held its breath. When she straightened and calmly asked Lord Ashford to try, her voice was as calm as a lake's surface. The engine awakened on the first attempt, roaring with the perfect power of a stretching feline after sleep. The silence that followed was worth all the years of humiliation. The mechanics were petrified, their textbook knowledge shattered by 5 minutes of real competence. Emma calmly wiped her hands, cast a final glance at the muted group, and headed for her van. It was Lord Ashford's voice that stopped her. He wanted to know who she was, where she'd learned. And as Emma told the story of her grandfather and the garage in Bethnal Green, she saw something change in his gray eyes. The boredom had vanished, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. Interest, the offer of his business card, and the proposal to maintain his 12 collector cars triggered protests from the mechanics. But Lord Ashford silenced them with a gesture that spoke of absolute power. Emma took the card, thick cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind that opens doors, and left. In the rearview mirror of the coughing transit heading home, she saw the mechanics surrounding Lord Ashford, like angry bees. But he was looking in her direction, motionless as a statue, and Emma understood something had changed. She didn't know what yet, but the world had trembled on its hinges. 2 weeks later, a Bentley Mulsanne stopped outside the crumbling building in Stratford where Emma lived. The chauffeur in livery showed no surprise at the graffiti on the walls or the smell of curry permeating the stairwell. He was paid not to see, not to judge, only to drive. Lord Ashford's office occupied the top floor of a tower in Canary Wharf that clawed at the London sky. It was vast as a cathedral of capitalism, with a glass wall offering a vertiginous view over the Thames and the city beyond. The other walls were a private museum of automotive photography, racing Ferraris, vintage Bentleys, Bugattis worth more than entire buildings. Lord Ashford awaited her standing before the window, his silhouette outlined against the urban panorama. When he turned, Emma noticed he'd abandoned the armor of the perfect suit. Sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, he seemed more human, and therefore more dangerous. He wasted no time on pleasantries. While personally preparing 2 coffees with a vintage Gaggia machine, he listed everything he'd discovered about her. the distinction in her mechanics qualification, the national automotive prizes, the ordeal of 23 rejected applications with increasingly creative excuses. He even knew about the attempt at McLaren, cut short for what official documents called environmental incompatibility, but both knew was harassment disguised as banter. Then came the revelation. He produced a photo of a smiling 16-year-old in racing overalls. His daughter Charlotte, brilliant and determined, who dreamed of becoming a mechanical engineer and was told by well-meaning teachers that perhaps architecture would be more suitable for a girl. Emma recognized her own reflection multiplied in that story. How many Charlottes were out there? How many dreamers being told to lower their sights? Lord Ashford's proposal was simple in its revolutionary audacity. 3,000 square meters of state-of-the-art workshop space in Dagenham, already equipped with £3 million worth of cutting-edge equipment. It was to become the first luxury garage run by women, not for quotas or marketing, but for pure excellence. Emma would have free rein on hiring and technical management. £2 million budget for the first year, 50-50 on profits, an offer that seemed too good to be true, and perhaps that's exactly why it was. Lord Ashford explained he'd done his calculations. 40% of luxury car owners in London were women. 80% felt uncomfortable in traditional garages. It was an untapped market, a commercial opportunity as much as a social one. But Emma saw beyond the numbers. She saw the possibility of creating what her grandfather had always dreamed of, a place where talent counted more than chromosomes. She accepted with one condition: the garage would be called Thompson's, like her grandfather's. Lord Ashford agreed, adding a subtitle that sounded like a declaration of war: Excellence knows no boundaries. The transformation of the workshop was a labor of love and precision. Each lift was positioned to optimize workflow. Diagnostic stations organized like orchestra sections. A break room that didn't look like a cupboard, but a place where human beings could recharge. Changing rooms with showers worthy of a spa, because taking care of oneself wasn't vanity, but respect. But the real magic came with the people. Margaret Davies presented herself with 52 years and 20 years of experience thrown in the bin. She'd been the only woman in a garage of 15 mechanics. Guess who they chose to make redundant during restructuring? But when Emma presented her with a vintage Jaguar engine with carburetor problems, Margaret came alive. Her hands caressed the engine like a lost lover, finding the problem in minutes where others would have taken hours. Sophie Clark arrived with a mechanical engineering degree, first-class honors, and a collection of rejections motivated by her beauty. Too pretty to get her hands dirty, clients would be distracted. She didn't give the right image. When she solved a complex BMW electrical problem in an hour, mapping the system with neurosurgical precision, Emma knew she'd found a diamond. Priya Patel brought a heartbreaking story. Born in Leicester to parents who ran a corner shop, her father, a mechanic back in Gujarat, had secretly taught her the trade at night. Fluent in 4 languages, but no garage had taken her seriously. It took her 30 seconds of listening to a Mercedes engine to diagnose a problem with injector number 3. She was right. It wasn't only women who came. James Mitchell, 19 years old with the look of a poet, had been rejected by traditional garages for being too soft. He didn't swear, didn't make crude jokes, didn't pretend to appreciate the pin-up calendars.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
But he had hands that spoke the language of engines better than many veterans. George Harrison was the biggest surprise. 62 years old, former workshop foreman in early retirement, he presented himself with disarming humility. He'd worked 4 decades with only men, had seen competent female colleagues humiliated and driven out. It was time to give something back, he said. His experience became the workshop's backbone, his presence a guarantee for more conservative clients. The evening before the official opening, Emma found herself alone in the workshop. The soft lighting illuminated a dream made steel and concrete. She sat in the center of the space and allowed herself a moment of pure terror. Tomorrow she would discover if years of fighting had meaning or if the critics were right. Her phone lit up with messages. Margaret joking about the bet made with her skeptical husband. Sophie, who'd bought Ferrari red nail polish for the occasion. Priya, whose father had called from Leicester to say how proud he was. James promising to make them proud. George, whose wife hadn't seen him so enthusiastic in years. Emma understood she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by warriors, each with their own scars, united in a battle that went beyond engines and oil. As she drove home, the transit coughed twice, as always. But that night, it sounded like applause. Thompson's Garage was ready to make history. The success of Thompson's Garage was immediate and resounding. In the first months, curiosity brought clients in droves. Some came to see the phenomenon, others to support the initiative, but all stayed for the competence. Enthusiastic reviews multiplied. Word of mouth did the rest. But the real test came with Richard Pemberton. Pemberton was the undisputed king of London luxury car dealerships, a man who'd built his empire on two pillars: technical competence and sexism disguised as tradition. When he crossed the workshop threshold with his retinue of yes-men, the air became electric. He brought a challenge and a smirk. A Ferrari 488 with a problem 3 specialist garages hadn't been able to solve. Intermittent power loss, impossible to replicate, invisible to computers. If the ladies succeeded where the best had failed, he'd bring his entire fleet's maintenance here. 60 luxury cars, a £1 million contract. Emma immediately understood it was a trap. If they failed, it would prove the garage was just an expensive social experiment. But she had no choice. She accepted, adding a clause: if they succeeded, Pemberton would give a public interview admitting he'd been wrong about women mechanics. For 2 days, the workshop transformed into a feverish laboratory. Each mechanic brought their expertise to the challenge. Margaret analyzed the engine with the eye of someone who'd seen Ferrari evolution over 30 years. Sophie connected every available diagnostic tool, mapping parameters others didn't consider. Priya dismantled and reassembled components with Swiss watchmaker precision. It was James, the boy everyone considered too shy, who noticed a pattern. The problem manifested more often during acceleration after corners. What if it wasn't the engine? His uncle had raced on track, had taught him that sometimes the problem is where you least expect it. The insight lit a collective bulb. They focused on the fuel system and found the culprit: a hairline crack in the tank's inner wall. Under specific G-forces, it let air into the system, confusing the injection. A manufacturing defect almost impossible to detect, which had fooled London's best Ferrari specialists. When Pemberton returned and the Ferrari roared perfectly under all driving conditions, his face went through the entire chromatic spectrum of disbelief. The contract signing took place before cameras and journalists, but the moment that entered legend was when Pemberton, with a strangled voice, publicly admitted that competence has no gender. The effect was an avalanche. The workshop was flooded not only with repair requests, but with internship applications, school visits, women wanting to change careers. Emma found herself a symbol of something larger than herself, and the responsibility weighed like a V12 engine. One evening, as the workshop closed after another intense day, Lord Ashford made one of his surprise visits. He observed the team at work: Margaret teaching an intern how to feel an engine, Sophie and Priya in animated discussion about an electronic solution, James coordinating work on a Lamborghini with newfound confidence. His expansion proposal — Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh were asking for Thompson's Garage replicas — found Emma cautious. First perfection, then conquest. Lord Ashford nodded, commenting that her grandfather would have been proud. Emma felt tears prick, remembering the promise made to a stubborn old man in an East End garage. 6 months after opening, on an ordinary Tuesday in November, fate entered Thompson's garage with a famous name and a shy smile. Lewis Hamilton, 7-time Formula One world champion, was looking for the mechanic who'd transformed his cousin Sophie from a frustrated graduate into a fulfilled engineer. Emma recognized him immediately. What car-mad girl hadn't had a Lewis poster in her room, but struggled to stay professional, while a streak of grease adorned her cheek? He studied her with those brown eyes that had seen victories and defeats at 200 miles per hour, finding in the oil-stained mechanic something more interesting than all the paddock models. Lewis became a regular client, bringing a vintage car collection that eclipsed even Lord Ashford's. But more importantly, he stayed. He talked with Emma about engines and dreams, about what it meant to excel in worlds that considered you an anomaly. He, the working-class kid from Stevenage, who'd conquered Formula One. She, the woman in a universe of men. The tension grew with each visit, under the amused eyes of Sophie, who never missed a chance to tease her cousin. It was during the workshop's Christmas party, makeshift tables between the lifts, fairy lights wrapped around tools, that everything came to a head. Lewis appeared uninvited with expensive champagne, and that vulnerability he only showed in private. He mingled with everyone, listening to Margaret's stories, discussing electronics with his cousin, learning from Priya the differences between British and Indian approaches. But his eyes always returned to Emma. At midnight, in the small office that smelled of coffee and technical drawings, the truth emerged simple and direct. He no longer came for the cars, but for her. For the warrior in overalls who never bent, who'd built an empire from nothing, who laughed at obstacles instead of crying over them. Emma protested she wasn't the paddock type. She was neither model nor PR girl, just a mechanic with perpetually dirty hands. That's exactly why, he replied. He loved her. Because she was real in a world of pretense. Because when she touched an engine, it was poetry. Because she'd saved his cousin from despair. The kiss that followed tasted of champagne and future, of different worlds finding common ground. When they separated, they laughed together about the inevitable media scandal. The champion and the mechanic. The tabloids would have a field day. But Lewis was used to defying expectations, and Emma had learned that the best battles are those you don't expect to fight. The wedding, 6 months later, was celebrated where it all began, in the workshop, not from forced originality, but because this was their world. Among the cars they loved, surrounded by the family she'd chosen, Emma Thompson became Emma Hamilton without losing anything of herself. Lord Ashford was best man, moved to see how far the girl with the battered van had come. But the real challenge was yet to come. The call from Woking came when Emma was 3 months pregnant. McLaren wanted her and her team for a revolutionary project, creating the first all-female development and maintenance division for the new hypercar line. Every mechanic's dream, served on a silver platter. But accepting meant closing Thompson's garage, relocating, abandoning everything they'd built. It meant telling Margaret she'd have to find another job. Sophie, that her journey would be interrupted. Priya, that the money for her family would stop. It meant betraying the trust of hundreds of girls who saw the garage as proof that everything was possible. Lewis found her that evening sitting in the empty workshop, one hand on her still flat belly where their future was growing. He said nothing, sat beside her, and waited. It was one of his strengths. He knew when silence was worth more than words. The decision was made collectively. Emma called the assembly, laid out the offer with brutal transparency. The silence that followed was heavy as a broken engine. Then Margaret spoke, with the firm voice of someone who'd already lost too much. She voted to stay. Here they were family. At McLaren, they'd be employees. The vote was unanimous. But Emma transformed the refusal into opportunity. She proposed a partnership to McLaren. Thompson's garage would become a certified training center for female mechanics. McLaren would provide training and certifications. They would train the future. The negotiations were exhausting. McLaren wasn't used to hearing no or negotiating with independent garages. But Emma had learned from Lord Ashford that everything is business, and business is done between equals. After weeks of back and forth, the agreement was reached. On signing day, Emma was 8 months pregnant. She entered the Woking conference room in her customized maternity overalls, refusing to dress appropriately. It was a message: accept us as we are or don't accept us at all. McLaren understood and accepted. A month later, while supervising training against all medical advice, her waters broke. Lewis drove her to hospital in the same Bentley that had started everything, closing a perfect circle in destiny's geometry. Sophia Hamilton was born after 8 hours of labor, with already curious eyes and little hands that moved as if seeking a spanner. The nurse joked she already had mechanic's hands. Emma replied she had the hands of someone who would change the world, because change is hereditary, like eye color. 5 years after that first miraculous repair, Thompson's garage had become a cultural phenomenon. Not a franchise. Emma had refused million-pound offers, but a movement. 3 locations in Britain, 200 mechanics certified through the McLaren program, and above all, a generation of girls who now knew that impossible was just an opinion. The 10th anniversary was celebrated where it all began. The Dagenham workshop was packed with people who were living history. Lord Ashford, aged with elegance, told the Bentley story for the umpteenth time with a grandfather's passion before his grandchildren. The 3 original mechanics, now great supporters, admitted laughing how blind they'd been. Pemberton, converted to female entrepreneurship, brought testimony of a changed man. But the moment that stopped time was when Margaret took the microphone. 70 years old but still able to diagnose a problem by ear, she told how 10 years earlier she'd been a finished woman, discarded like an obsolete spare part. Now she was chief trainer at McLaren for historic engines, but above all, part of a family that had rewritten the rules. Sophia, 5 years old, and already able to distinguish a V8 from a V12 by sound, played among the cars while her mother received honors. But for Emma, the greatest prize was in the office. The photo from day one next to her grandfather's, and before her Ruby, 18 years old, new intern with that hunger in her eyes to prove the world wrong. The circle closed and reopened. Every little girl who now dreamed of engines instead of princess crowns had an example. Every discarded woman had a place to start again. Every prejudice fell under the spanner blows of competent hands. Thompson's garage didn't just fix cars, it fixed the world, one engine at a time. And somewhere, in a small suburban garage, a little girl looked at an engine with curiosity. When someone would tell her it wasn't for girls, she now had an answer that echoed from London to Woking. Do you know Emma Thompson? The revolution had only just begun. If this story moved and inspired you, leave a like. Share in the comments. Have you ever had to prove twice as much to be taken seriously? What's your dream that everyone says is impossible? Subscribe and hit the bell to not miss more stories of women who challenged the world and won. Remember, every time someone says you can't do it, it's just an opinion, not a sentence. The future belongs to those who dare.